The hall was already filling when the woman stepped inside. It was not a big place, just a modest recital hall with rows of wooden chairs and soft yellow lights hanging from the ceiling. People were dressed neatly, some in fine coats, others holding programs and whispering to each other. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know what they were doing, where they belonged. The woman did not feel that way. She paused near the door, holding her bag close to her chest. Her clothes were clean but plain, the kind that did not draw attention. Her shoes were worn from years of use. She looked around slowly, making sure she was not in anyone's way. No one noticed her arrival. That seemed normal to her. She had learned long ago how easy it was to blend into the background. The piano stood at the front of the room, polished and shining under the lights. It was the heart of the evening. People glanced at it with excitement, as if something magical was waiting to happen. The woman's eyes rested on it for a moment longer than the rest. There was something in her gaze that suggested familiarity, not curiosity. She knew that piano, or at least she knew instruments like it. She had known them most of her life. She found an empty seat near the side, away from the center. Sitting down quietly, she placed her bag at her feet and folded her hands in her lap. Around her, conversations flowed easily. People talked about famous teachers, difficult pieces, past performances. Some spoke proudly about their children or students who would perform that night. Laughter rose and fell, confident and carefree. No one spoke to her. No one asked who she was or why she was there. She did not expect them to. She listened instead, her face calm, her thoughts drifting backward in time. Music had entered her life when she was very young. There was no grand beginning, no special teacher, no expensive lessons. There had only been an old piano in a small room, its keys yellowed and uneven. It had belonged to someone else once, someone who had left it behind. The woman had found it by chance and touched the keys out of curiosity. That first sound had stayed with her forever. She had practiced when no one was watching. Early mornings, late nights, in moments stolen between work and responsibility. Music had been her private language, something she spoke only to herself. Life had not given her space to dream loudly. There were bills to pay, people to care for, days that left her tired before the sun even set. Still, she played. She played when her hands ached. She played when doubt crept in and told her she was wasting time. She played when silence felt too heavy to carry. Music did not fix her life, but it gave it meaning. It gave her a way to breathe. Tonight, sitting in the recital hall, she told herself she was only there to listen. That was the safe choice. Listening required nothing from her. It asked for no courage, no explanation. She could sit quietly, enjoy the music, and leave unnoticed, just as she had arrived. At the front, a well-known maestro took his place. People straightened in their seats. The room grew quieter. He carried himself with confidence earned over many years. His name was familiar to everyone there. His presence alone seemed to raise the importance of the event. The woman watched him with respect, not fear. She had seen many like him from a distance. Talented, celebrated, certain of their place in the world. She did not blame them for that certainty. It was something life had never offered her. The first performer was announced, and the evening began. One by one, pianists walked to the stage. Some were young, others more experienced. Their performances were polished, practiced, impressive. The audience applauded politely, sometimes warmly, sometimes out of habit. The woman listened carefully to each piece. She felt the rhythm, noticed the pauses, heard where emotion flowed and where it felt forced. She did not judge harshly. She knew how hard it was to sit at a piano in front of others. Every mistake felt louder under watching eyes. Between performances, people shifted in their seats and whispered again. A few glanced at the woman briefly, then looked away. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, perhaps a relative of someone else, perhaps someone who had wandered in by mistake. There was nothing about her that suggested she belonged on that stage. And that was fine. Or at least she told herself it was. As the program continued, a strange feeling settled in her chest. It was not jealousy. It was not anger. It was something quieter and more dangerous. It was the question she had avoided for years rising slowly to the surface. What if? What if she had tried earlier? What if she had believed, even once, that her music mattered? What if silence had not always been the safer choice? She pushed the thoughts away. Regret was easy to invite and hard to send away. She focused instead on the sound of the piano, letting it wash over her. Then something unexpected happened. A pause longer than usual followed the end of one performance. The maestro frowned slightly, checking the program. A quiet discussion took place near the stage. Whispers spread through the audience, curious and alert. It became clear that one of the scheduled performers had not arrived. The gap felt small, almost unimportant, but it changed the energy in the room. The maestro spoke briefly to the audience, explaining there would be a short delay. People nodded, some checking their phones, others stretching their legs. The woman remained still. She did not know why her heart began to race. Nothing had been asked of her. No one had looked in her direction. Yet something inside her shifted, as if a door she had kept locked for years had cracked open just enough to let light through. She looked at the piano again. For the first time that evening, the thought formed clearly in her mind. Not as a dream, not as a fantasy, but as a quiet truth. She could play. The idea scared her more than she expected. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together. She told herself she was being foolish. This was not her place. She was not part of the program. She was not known. She was not trained in the way these performers were trained. But she was honest. She had lived her life doing what was expected, staying in the lines drawn for her by circumstance. She had been responsible, dependable, invisible. Music had been the one place where she allowed herself to be real. Around her, the room buzzed with light conversation. No one noticed the battle happening quietly inside her. To the world, she was still just a simple woman sitting near the side of a recital hall. She took a slow breath. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She could not unhear the call of the piano. She could not pretend that this moment did not matter. Even if she never touched those keys, the choice itself would change her. The lights seemed a little brighter. The room felt a little smaller. Somewhere deep inside, courage stirred, fragile but alive. And as the maestro turned back toward the stage, unaware of the storm forming in one quiet corner of the hall, the woman straightened in her seat, her eyes steady now, her heart pounding with a feeling she had almost forgotten. Hope. The pause in the program stretched longer than anyone expected. At first, people treated it lightly, standing to stretch their legs or whispering small jokes. But as minutes passed, a quiet impatience began to spread. Chairs creaked as people shifted. Programs were folded and unfolded. The soft excitement that had filled the room earlier began to thin. The woman stayed seated. Her hands rested on her knees now, fingers lightly pressing into the fabric of her clothes. She was aware of her breathing, slow but uneven. The idea that had formed inside her earlier refused to leave. It circled her thoughts again and again, gentle but persistent. She watched the people near the front. A few organizers spoke in low voices. The maestro glanced toward the side of the stage, then back at the audience, his face calm but clearly annoyed. He was used to precision. Delays were not part of his world. Someone in the crowd whispered, loud enough for others to hear, wondering why the missing performer had not shown up. Another person shrugged and said these things happened. A few laughed softly, already losing interest. The woman felt strangely separate from all of it. The room felt distant, like she was watching the scene through glass. Inside her chest, memories stirred again, uninvited. She remembered standing outside a music school years ago, watching students enter with confidence. She had stood there for a long time that day, telling herself she would walk in. She never did. Life had felt too heavy then. Dreams had felt like a luxury meant for other people. Now, years later, she sat in a recital hall with a real piano just steps away, and the same fear returned. But it was different this time. It was mixed with something else. A quiet anger, not at anyone in the room, but at herself for always choosing silence. She glanced down at her hands. They were not the hands of someone who had lived an easy life. There were faint marks from years of work, small scars from accidents that came with being busy and careful all at once. Still, she knew what those hands could do. They remembered the keys. They remembered the weight of sound. Near the aisle, a woman leaned over to her companion and nodded toward the stage. She joked that maybe anyone could go up and play at this point. Her tone was light, amused, careless. The words landed heavier than intended. The simple woman felt a small heat rise to her face. Not because of the joke itself, but because it touched the truth she was trying to ignore. Anyone could go up, the voice inside her said. Anyone brave enough. She looked up again. The piano waited, silent and patient. It did not care who approached it. It did not ask for names, titles, or approval. It only responded to touch. Her heart beat faster. Across the room, an organizer stepped forward and spoke quietly to the maestro. Their expressions suggested uncertainty. The maestro nodded once, then turned slightly toward the audience. He cleared his throat. He explained that the program would continue shortly, but they were considering how to fill the unexpected gap. His voice was calm, professional, practiced. The audience listened politely, though a few people exchanged glances. For a brief moment, his eyes scanned the room. They passed over faces, paused on familiar ones, then moved on. When his gaze brushed past the woman, it did not linger. There was no reason for it to. She felt the familiar sting of being unseen. It was not dramatic. It did not break her. It was something she had known her whole life. But this time, instead of shrinking, it sparked something. She shifted forward in her seat. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but to her it felt enormous. Her bag slid slightly at her feet. The sound seemed too loud in her ears. She froze, waiting to see if anyone had noticed. No one had. She swallowed and took another breath. Her mind raced through reasons to stay seated. She was not prepared. She had not practiced on this piano. People would laugh. The maestro would dismiss her. She would regret it forever. But another thought followed, quieter and steadier. She would regret it more if she did nothing. Her body moved before her fear could catch up. She stood slowly, smoothing her clothes without realizing it. Her legs felt unsteady, but they held her weight. She looked around once more, half hoping someone would stop her. No one did. A few nearby heads turned, curious but uninterested. To them, she was simply someone standing, perhaps heading for the exit. No one imagined she was walking toward the piano. Step by step, she moved down the aisle. Each step echoed in her chest. The closer she got to the front, the louder the room seemed, even though conversations had quieted. An organizer noticed her first and raised a hand slightly, as if to ask a question. She met his eyes and spoke softly. Her voice did not shake as much as she expected. She explained that she could fill the gap if needed. There was a pause. He looked at her, surprised, then uncertain. He glanced at the maestro, who was now paying attention. The room sensed a shift. Whispers started again, sharper this time. Some people leaned forward, curious. Others frowned, clearly unimpressed. A few smiled, amused by the unexpected moment. The maestro studied her from where he stood. His expression was not unkind, but it was doubtful. He saw a woman who did not match the image of the performers he was used to. Plain clothes, nervous posture, no introduction. He asked her a question, simple and direct. What would she play? She answered honestly. Something she knew well. Something from the heart. There was another pause. Time felt stretched thin, like a held breath. The woman could feel every eye in the room now. The weight of attention pressed down on her, heavy and unfamiliar. The maestro hesitated. This was not part of the plan. This was not how recitals were supposed to run. Yet the gap remained, and the audience was waiting. At last he nodded once. The nod was small, almost reluctant, but it was enough. A quiet wave of reaction moved through the room. Some people straightened, suddenly alert. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. A few smiled as if expecting something amusing. The woman thanked him quietly and turned toward the piano. The short walk from the edge of the stage to the bench felt longer than the entire evening before it. Her heart hammered in her chest. Her mouth felt dry. She reminded herself to breathe. She sat down. The bench was firm beneath her. The piano loomed in front of her, larger up close, its surface reflecting the lights above. For a brief moment, doubt surged again. Then she placed her hands over the keys. They hovered there, not touching yet. The room fell silent, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Even those who doubted leaned in slightly. In that stillness, she felt something unexpected. Peace. The noise of fear softened. The weight of eyes faded. There was only her and the piano, just as it had always been in quiet rooms and stolen hours. She lowered her fingers. The first note had not yet sounded, but the choice had already been made, and there was no turning back. The first note floated into the air softly, almost shy. It was not loud or dramatic. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, clear and steady. For a moment, a few people shifted in their seats, unsure if the performance had truly begun. Then the second note followed, and the third. The woman's fingers moved slowly at first, as if testing the space, listening to how the room answered back. The piano responded warmly. The sound carried farther than she expected, filling corners of the hall that had been quiet only seconds before. A small ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Some leaned forward. Others stopped, whispering mid-sentence. The room began to listen. She closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the crowd, but to remember herself. This was how it always started when she played alone. One note at a time. No rush. No need to impress. Just honesty. The melody grew gently, like a story being told without words. It was not a famous piece. There was no show of speed or force. Instead, it carried feeling, shaped by years of living, loss, and quiet endurance. The woman's shoulders relaxed as the music settled into her body. Her hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose now, guided by memory rather than thought. She did not look at the audience. She did not look at the maestro. She only listened. In the crowd, reactions shifted. A man in the second row, who had earlier checked his phone during performances, slowly lowered it to his lap. A woman near the aisle stopped fanning herself and held still. Even those who had smiled with doubt before now watched closely. The maestro stood where he was, arms crossed loosely. At first, his face showed polite patience. He had heard many pianists. He expected to stop her if the performance faltered. It did not. As the melody deepened, something in his expression changed. His brow tightened slightly. His eyes sharpened. He leaned forward just a fraction, listening not as a judge, but as a musician. The woman reached a passage that carried weight. The notes fell heavier now, slower, filled with longing. They spoke of missed chances and quiet strength. They spoke of someone who had waited a long time to be heard. The hall seemed to shrink around the sound. The usual distractions disappeared. There was no rustling of programs, no coughing, no movement. Even the air felt still. She remembered nights when she played after long days, when her body was tired but her heart needed release. She remembered playing softly so as not to wake anyone, letting the piano hear things she could not say out loud. That same truth poured into her hands now. A few people in the audience felt their throats tighten, though they did not understand why. They could not explain what the music reminded them of, only that it felt familiar, personal. The woman's breathing matched the rhythm. Each phrase rose and fell naturally. There was no fear left, only focus. The piano was no longer an object on a stage. It was a companion. The maestro straightened slowly. His arms dropped to his sides. He no longer thought about the missing performer or the broken schedule. He was listening to something rare. Not perfection, but truth. As the music continued, the woman introduced a change. The melody lifted, becoming lighter, hopeful. It suggested dawn after a long night. The shift surprised the room, drawing people in even more. A soft smile touched her face, almost without her noticing. This part of the piece had always felt like forgiveness to her. Forgiveness for herself, for waiting, for doubting. The audience felt it too. Someone near the back wiped their eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. Another person clasped their hands together, as if holding onto the sound. The maestro took a step closer to the piano. He did not realize he was moving until he was already nearer. His attention was complete now. The woman's fingers danced through a gentle run, not flashy, but confident. Each note landed exactly where it needed to. The piano seemed to sing under her touch. She was no longer thinking about what would happen after. She was not thinking about judgment or praise. She was simply present, fully alive in the moment. The final section approached, and she felt it in her chest. This was where the piece always asked the most of her. Not technically, but emotionally. She let the sound soften, pulling the audience closer instead of pushing them away. The notes became quieter, more delicate, as if the music itself were holding its breath. The hall followed. When she reached the final chord, she did not rush it. She allowed it to fade naturally, letting the silence settle afterward. The sound disappeared. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was deep and full, not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are afraid to break something beautiful. The woman's hands rested on the keys. She opened her eyes slowly. For the first time since sitting down, she looked out at the room. What she saw startled her. Faces that had once looked bored or doubtful were now open and still. Eyes were fixed on her, not with judgment, but with awe and confusion and something close to gratitude. The maestro stood very still. His mouth was slightly open, as if he had meant to speak and forgotten how. He looked at her not as an interruption, but as a discovery. Then someone began to clap. It was tentative at first, a single pair of hands breaking the silence. Then another joined and another. The sound grew quickly, spreading through the room like a wave. Applause filled the hall. The woman stood up slowly, almost unsure of what to do. She stepped back from the piano, her heart pounding again, but this time for a different reason. The maestro moved forward. He did not speak right away. He looked at her closely, as if trying to understand where she had come from, how such music had been hidden in plain sight. The applause continued, warm and sincere. The woman felt her eyes sting. She blinked, steadying herself. She bowed her head slightly. A simple gesture, honest and unpolished. For the first time in her life she felt seen. Not for how she looked, not for what she lacked, but for what she carried inside. As the clapping slowly faded, the room remained focused on her. The moment had changed something, though no one yet knew how. She stepped away from the piano, her legs light, her breath shallow, her heart full. Whatever came next, she knew one truth without doubt. She would never again believe that her voice did not matter. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the hall in waves, growing stronger instead of softer. Some people stood without realizing they were doing it. Others remained seated but clapped with a focus that felt almost personal. The woman stood near the piano, unsure where to look, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. She felt exposed in a way she never had before. Not weak but open. The music had taken something private from inside her and placed it in the air for everyone to hear. Now she had to stand in that truth. The maestro lifted one hand slowly, a quiet signal. The applause softened and then stopped. The silence that followed felt different from before. It was not heavy now, but expectant. He looked at her again, longer this time. There was no doubt left in his eyes. Only curiosity and respect. He spoke, his voice calm but clearly moved. He thanked her for playing. The words were simple, but the way he said them carried weight. People listened closely. Then he asked her a question. Where had she studied? The woman felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She answered honestly. She had not studied anywhere special. She had learned on her own, over many years in quiet places. A soft murmur moved through the room. The maestro did not react the way some expected. He did not smile in disbelief or shake his head. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if the answer made sense. He asked another question. How long had she been playing? She hesitated, counting silently. It felt strange to measure her life that way. She gave a rough number, speaking gently, almost apologetically. Again he nodded. People in the audience leaned forward. They were no longer just witnesses to a performance. They were part of a story unfolding in real time. The maestro turned slightly toward the audience and spoke about what they had just heard. He did not use complicated words. He spoke about honesty in music, about listening beyond technique, about how rare it was to hear someone play without trying to impress. The woman listened, stunned. She was not used to being spoken about, especially not like this. When he finished, he looked back at her and asked if she would be willing to play once more. A quiet gasp moved through the hall. The woman's heart jumped. She had not expected that. The first performance had taken everything she had. The thought of playing again, with everyone now watching so closely, felt overwhelming. She hesitated. The room waited. She took a breath and nodded. She returned to the piano, her movements slower this time, more careful. She sat down again, placing her hands on the keys. This time, she kept her eyes open. She chose a simpler piece. One that reminded her of early mornings and soft light through a window. One that felt like home. The first notes were gentle, almost playful. The mood in the room shifted again, lighter but no less focused. People smiled softly. Some closed their eyes. The maestro stepped back, allowing the moment to belong fully to her. As she played, something inside her settled. She was no longer trying to prove anything, even to herself. She was sharing. When the second piece ended, the applause returned, warmer than before. This time, the woman smiled openly. Not a wide smile, but a real one. She stood and stepped away from the piano once more. The maestro approached her again, this time closer. He spoke quietly so only she could hear, but microphones carried part of his voice to the audience. He told her that what she had was rare. Not just skill, but depth. He said many people learn to play notes, but few learn to speak through them. The woman felt her throat tighten. She nodded, unable to speak. He asked if she would be open to staying after the recital to talk. She agreed. The formal program resumed after that, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The remaining performers played well, but the audience listened differently now. There was a sense that something important had already happened. The woman returned to her seat near the side. People nearby glanced at her, not with curiosity now, but with respect. A few smiled at her. One person whispered a quiet thank you as she passed. She sat down slowly, her legs still unsteady. As the rest of the recital continued, she barely noticed the time passing. Her thoughts moved inward. She replayed the moment she had stood up, the sound of the first note, the silence that followed. For years, she had believed that being unseen was safer. That attention brought disappointment. Tonight had challenged that belief. When the final performance ended and the audience began to stand and gather their things, the woman remained seated for a moment. She needed time to understand what had just happened. An organizer approached her gently and told her the maestro was waiting. She stood and followed, moving through small groups of people who stepped aside to let her pass. Some offered quiet words of praise. She accepted them politely, still unsure how to carry them. Behind the stage, the space was quieter. The sounds of the hall were muffled. The maestro stood near a table, reviewing notes. He looked up as she entered. He invited her to sit. They talked simply. He asked about her life, her work, how music fit into her days. She answered honestly, without trying to make her story sound better or worse than it was. He listened. He told her that opportunities like this did not come often, but when they did, it was important to recognize them. He spoke about future possibilities, about guidance, about sharing her music more openly. The woman felt a mix of excitement and fear. The path he described was unfamiliar. It required courage she was still learning to trust. She told him she needed time. He respected that. As they stood to part, he thanked her again, not as a maestro to a performer, but as one musician to another. That word stayed with her. Musician. She left the hall later that night under the same soft lights she had entered beneath. The air outside felt cooler, fresher. Nothing about her appearance had changed. She was still wearing the same simple clothes. Her bag still rested against her side. But inside, something had shifted. She walked away knowing that she had crossed a line she could never step back over. She had been heard. And the world, just a little, had listened. The days after the recital moved differently than the days before. The woman noticed it the moment she woke the next morning. The world looked the same, but she did not feel the same inside it. There was a quiet awareness in her chest, like a light that had been turned on and could not be switched off. She returned to her routine. She went to work, completed her tasks, spoke politely, and kept her head down. From the outside, nothing had changed. But small moments felt heavier now. Sounds seemed sharper. Silence felt louder. At night, she sat at her old piano again. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, but her thoughts wandered. She replayed the recital in her mind without meaning to. The way the room had gone still. The look on people's faces. The sound of applause. She told herself not to read too much into it. One moment did not rewrite a life. She had learned that lesson before. Still, the feeling remained. A few days later, a message arrived. It was brief and respectful. The maestro wanted to continue the conversation they had started after the recital. He suggested a meeting, no pressure, just to talk. She read the message several times before replying. Part of her wanted to ignore it. Silence had always been her shield. It protected her from disappointment and from hope, which could hurt just as much. Another part of her felt something stronger now. Not ambition, but curiosity. She agreed to meet. The meeting took place in a quiet space with a piano near the window. Sunlight spilled across the floor, dust floating gently in the air. Felt less like an audition and more like an invitation. They talked again, calmly and honestly. The maestro asked about her days, her responsibilities, her reasons for staying hidden for so long. She answered without drama. She spoke about choosing stability, about putting others first, about believing that some dreams belong to younger people or luckier ones. He listened carefully. Then he spoke about timing. About how music did not belong to age or background. About how many people spent years learning technique but never learned to speak through sound. He said she already had that voice. The words stayed with her long after she left. Soon, small changes began to appear. She was invited to sit in on rehearsals. No expectations. Just listening, observing, learning. She felt out of place at first, surrounded by people who seemed so sure of themselves. But when music began, the feeling faded. Music was the one place where she understood herself fully. At rehearsals, she stayed quiet. She did not try to impress. She absorbed everything. Some people noticed her and were curious. Others were polite but distant. A few were unsure what to make of her presence. She did not blame them. She was still unsure herself. At home, her routine shifted. She practiced more openly now during daylight hours. She no longer rushed to close the piano when someone passed by. The sound filled her space freely. Yet doubt followed closely behind. Late at night, when the world grew quiet again, fear returned. What if the recital had been a mistake? What if she could not live up to what people thought they heard? What if she failed publicly this time? She wrestled with those thoughts alone. One evening, during rehearsal, she was asked to play again. Just a short piece. Nothing formal. Her hands froze for a moment. The room was smaller than the recital hall, but the eyes watching her felt just as heavy. She sat down, took a breath and began. The music came, slower than before, careful but true. She made a small mistake halfway through and felt her heart jump. In the past, that would have stopped her. This time, she continued. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone nodded. Another smiled. The maestro said nothing right away, but his expression was calm and approving. That moment mattered more than applause. Still, the pressure grew. Opportunities began to appear, small but real. A suggestion to perform again. A mention of a future event. Each one came with a choice. Accepting meant stepping further into the light. Declining meant returning to safety. She found herself standing at the edge again, just as she had years before outside that music school. The difference now was that she knew what waited on the other side. One afternoon, she sat alone in the quiet room with the piano. Sunlight rested on the keys. She placed her hands down and did not play right away. She thought about the woman she had been before the recital. The one who believed that being unnoticed was enough. That woman had survived. She had been strong. But survival was no longer enough. She began to play softly at first, then with more confidence. The music filled the room, steady and clear. As she played, she understood something important. This was not about becoming famous or changing her entire life overnight. It was about honesty, about no longer hiding a part of herself that had always been real. Later that day, she made a decision. She sent a message accepting the next opportunity offered to her. The reply came quickly. In the weeks that followed, she worked harder than she ever had. Not because anyone demanded it, but because she wanted to be ready. She balanced her responsibilities carefully, learning how to make room for herself without guilt. Some days were exhausting. Others were joyful. There were moments when she wanted to step back again, to choose quiet over risk. But she remembered the silence after the final note at the recital. She remembered what it felt like to be heard. That memory carried her forward. She knew the path ahead would not be simple. There would be setbacks, doubt, and difficult choices. But she also knew something she had never known before. Her music had a place. And this time she was willing to follow it. The day of the next performance arrived quietly. There were no crowds outside, no bright signs, no heavy sense of importance. It was a smaller event held in a modest hall much like the first one. But this time the woman walked in differently. Not with confidence exactly, but with acceptance. She knew why she was there. She arrived early and sat alone for a while. The room was empty, chairs lined neatly, the piano waiting under soft lights. She listened to the silence and felt calm. This place no longer felt like a test. It felt like a conversation she was ready to continue. As people began to arrive, she stayed seated. Some recognized her from the recital weeks earlier. A few nodded politely. Others smiled with quiet curiosity. No one whispered this time. She stood when it was time. Walking toward the piano, she felt her heart beat faster, but it did not scare her. It reminded her that she was alive in the moment. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and rested her hands on the keys. Before playing, she paused. She thought of the long path that had led her here. The years of quiet practice. The moments of doubt. The choice to stand up when it would have been easier to stay seated. None of it felt wasted now. She began to play. The music flowed easily, shaped by everything she had lived through. It was not perfect, but it was true. The sound filled the room naturally, reaching people without force. As she played, she noticed faces soften. Shoulders relaxed. Breathing slowed. The music did what it had always done for her. It made space. She finished and let the final note fade on its own. The applause came steady and warm. Not loud, not wild, but sincere. She stood and bowed her head slightly, gratitude clear in her expression. After the performance, she stayed and spoke with a few people. Some thanked her for the music. Others shared what it reminded them of. She listened more than she spoke. She understood now that music was not about being admired. It was about connection. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. She continued her work and responsibilities, but music no longer stayed hidden at the edges. It had a place in her days. Sometimes that meant performing. Other times it meant teaching a few basic lessons to those who wanted to learn but felt unsure of themselves. She recognized that hesitation immediately. When she taught, she did not talk much about technique at first. She talked about listening, about patience, about allowing mistakes without shame. People responded to that. One afternoon, she returned to the same recital hall where everything had changed. This time she was invited. She arrived early again, but the feeling was different now. The space felt familiar, welcoming. She walked to the piano and touched the edge lightly, as if greeting an old friend. The maestro was there, standing near the back, observing quietly. He nodded to her when their eyes met. No words were needed. When she played that evening, the room listened deeply. Not because of who she was, but because of how she played. She belonged there now, not by permission, but by truth. Afterward, as people gathered their things and prepared to leave, she remained seated for a moment. She watched the room empty slowly, remembering the first night she had sat there unseen. She smiled to herself. That woman still existed. The one who had waited, who had stayed quiet, who had believed that her voice did not matter. She did not reject that version of herself. She honored her. Without her patience and endurance, this moment would not exist. Later, walking home under the evening sky, she felt a gentle sense of peace. There was no sudden transformation waiting ahead. No promise that everything would be easy. But there was direction. She knew now that her music was not something she needed to protect from the world. It was something meant to be shared carefully, honestly, in her own time. In the days that followed, she continued to play. Sometimes for small groups, sometimes alone. The difference was that she no longer questioned whether she should. Her life did not become louder. It became clearer. And when she sat at the piano, fingers resting on the keys, she no longer felt overlooked. She felt present. That was enough.